This beggar girl reveals a hole in the millionaire's father's grave, but when they discover what's inside, they are shocked. Comment giving my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The afternoon sun beat down harshly on the cemetery in the small historic town of Havenwood when the scream cut through the stifling air like a knife. The widowed millionaire, 52 years old, almost spilled his coffee as he stepped away from the window of his luxury apartment. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity that made his heart race uncomfortably. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the old Victorian house across the street, a faded yellow 2-story building with peeling blue window frames that contrasted brutally with the modern elegance of his building. His fortune, accumulated through years of investing in the stock market, had afforded him the best apartment in the area, but it couldn't buy the peace he so desperately craved. "Must be a kid throwing a tantrum," he muttered to himself, adjusting his tie before returning to the contracts spread across the mahogany table. As the owner of the largest construction company in the region, he was used to solving complex engineering and management problems, but he preferred to keep his distance from human dramas that he couldn't control with spreadsheets and numbers. Especially after 5 years of living alone, since losing his wife on a rainy night he preferred not to remember. Grief had turned into an invisible barrier between him and the rest of the world, a protection that kept him safe but completely isolated. Across the street, inside the Victorian house, the 4-year-old girl cowered in the corner of the dirty, neglected kitchen. Her thin arms trembled as she watched her 38-year-old aunt firmly hold a metal spoon that she had heated on the gas stove. The woman's red eyes, swollen from the bourbon she'd been drinking since noon at O'Malley's bar downtown, stared at the child with a rage that seemed to grow every second. "You're a plague on this house," the aunt hissed, her voice slurred by the cheap whiskey. "Because of you, my sister's gone. Because of you, I lost everything good in my life." The spoon came down hard on the girl's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her delicate skin. The child bit her lip to avoid screaming louder, as she had learned that screams only enraged her aunt, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by the addiction that consumed her life. The girl closed her eyes tightly and tried to remember her mother's soft voice singing that lullaby before bed. It was all that remained of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments, like a balm that eased the physical and emotional pain. "Stop whimpering," the aunt grunted, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you get charcoal all over the walls again, you'll get a punishment you've never experienced before." The child ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall that she looked at every night, wondering if anyone up there really cared about her suffering. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's lullaby softly, the only thing that still comforted her in that world of pain. What she didn't know was that across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody that carried a sadness impossible to ignore. The businessman stopped reviewing the investment contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound floating through the open window. He recognized that song from somewhere distant in his memory. His late wife used to sing it when she cooked on Sundays, a folk song that talked about free birds flying away from sorrow. He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the deteriorated facade of the Victorian house with an attention he hadn't shown in weeks. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childish voice, trembling but persistent, carrying a melancholy that touched something deep in his hardened chest. For the first time in 3 weeks of daily screams, he felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that awakened a responsibility long buried under layers of obsessive work and self-imposed emotional isolation. Next door to the Victorian house, the 61-year-old retired teacher was watering her begonias when she heard the girl singing. Unlike the businessman, she could no longer ignore the signs that her 40 years of teaching had taught her to recognize. That voice carried a pain that broke her retired teacher's heart. For decades, working with children, she had developed an infallible instinct for identifying childhood suffering, and that melody whispered through the window cried out for help in a way that kept her awake during the wee hours. "That's odd," she thought, observing the always closed windows of the neighbor's house. The family she had known for decades had changed drastically in recent months. The child never played in the yard, never ran through the historic streets like the other children in town. The teacher dried her hands on her floral apron and made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to the girl's aunt, and maybe it was time to get to know the little one who sang sad songs behind walls that seemed to hide dark secrets. Meanwhile, the businessman remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest, like a pressure he couldn't relieve. The music had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories he preferred to keep dormant forever. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical movement of the historic town, awakening for another day. The retired teacher put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that wouldn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the Victorian house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps slowly approached. The aunt opened the door with a swollen face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. The strong smell of alcohol emanated from her, even though it was so early. "Good morning," said the teacher with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've had a proper chat." The aunt hesitated, running her hand through her disheveled hair and trying to hide the tremor in her hands. "Oh, Mrs. Davison, It's not a good time. The house is a terrible mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." The teacher took a step forward, forcing the woman to step back. "And I would love to get to know your niece better. I heard she's a lovely girl." The aunt's face hardened for a moment before forcing a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The girl is sick. High fever. Best not to get close so you don't catch anything." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the old wooden floor. The teacher pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently, as if afraid of being discovered. "Maybe I can help," insisted the teacher. "I have experience with sick children. I raised 3 kids, you know how it is." "No need, no," the aunt replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her thin body. "I already took her to the doctor. It's just a bad flu. It'll pass soon." The teacher noticed the woman's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the heavy atmosphere that could be felt even from outside the house. All the signs that she had learned to recognize during decades dealing with troubled families were there, screaming silently. Across the street, the businessman watched the scene from his window while having breakfast at his imported crystal table. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confusing dreams, where a child's voice mixed with painful memories he preferred to forget. When he saw the teacher at the door of the Victorian house, a strange curiosity overcame him. His fortune in stocks and investments had given him many privileges, but it had never bought him the ability to completely ignore the human suffering that was happening just a few feet from his window. The teacher finally said goodbye to the aunt, but not before casting an inquisitive look into the dark interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there. and her experience told her that a child was suffering in ways that no person should ever know. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her growing suspicions. Inside the Victorian house, the aunt slammed the door shut with excessive force and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl crouching behind the old table, trying to hide in the shadows. The child had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process, creating the noise that almost gave her away. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" the aunt snarled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit that had awakened her paranoia. "I was thirsty," the girl mumbled, her big eyes fixed on the stained wooden floor. "Thirsty?" The aunt laughed bitterly, a sound that made the child shrink even more. "You want water? Then go get it in the backyard. And since you like making so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." The girl went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single mango tree that offered the only shade in the place. There, she sat on the dry earth and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the gas stove. It was always birds, small, big, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her impossible dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The drawings were her silent way of resisting, of keeping alive a part of herself that the aunt couldn't completely destroy. The hours passed slowly under the harsh midday sun. The aunt had locked the back door, leaving the child in the yard without access to water or food. The girl began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to hum her mother's lullaby softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached the businessman's ears again. This time, he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar in that voice, in that specific song that awakened memories he struggled to keep buried. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without consciously thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but a deep instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind like pieces of a painful puzzle that he had avoided putting together for years. He remembered an employee who used to work at his company, a kind woman who always hummed that same song while organizing files and documents. A dedicated person who had worked for him for 3 years before disappearing abruptly, leaving only a formal resignation letter and many unanswered questions. The woman always spoke fondly about her little daughter, a 4-year-old girl named. The businessman felt a chill run down his spine when the memory finally crystallized. The daughter of his former employee was named exactly like the child who was now suffering in the house across the street. "It can't be a coincidence," he muttered to himself, the cell phone trembling in his hands as he continued to record the sad voice that floated through the afternoon air. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, making him stagger and lean on the windowsill. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the kind woman who had disappeared from his life during a period when he was completely absorbed in his own problems. The growing conflicts with his late wife, the financial pressures of expanding his investments, the obsessive need to accumulate more wealth and assets. How hadn't he made that connection before? How had he been so blind as not to realize that suffering was happening right before his eyes, involving someone who had a direct connection to his past life? 3 days had passed since the businessman discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire that burned every thought. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 in the afternoon, always with the same methodical brutality that made his stomach churn. His collection of videos and audios grew on his cell phone, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same emotional cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost his wife. On that Thursday morning, the retired teacher made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering just a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the Victorian house in a glaring way. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of trying a new direct visit to the aunt, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from where she had the best view of the backyard of the neighboring house. What she saw left her completely horrified. The girl was sitting under the mango tree completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and dirty underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed, others already scarred in irregular shapes that told a story of systematic torture. The child was drawing on the dirt with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that Mrs. Davison recognized as birds. "Good heavens," the teacher whispered, her hands trembling as she gripped the fence separating the yards. It was much worse than she had imagined in her darkest suspicions. The girl looked up and saw the lady watching her with compassion. For a moment, the two stared at each other in a silence heavy with meaning. Then, to Mrs. Davison's surprise, the child smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly with her thin little hand. "Hi, Grandma," said the girl in her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, sweetie," replied Mrs. Davison, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" The child glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering, a gesture that revealed the constant fear in which she lived. "Yes, I'm fine. I'm just drawing birdies." "How lovely. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot. They can fly wherever they want," replied the girl, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke the teacher's heart. At that moment, the aunt's harsh voice echoed from inside the house, like a threatening thunder. "Where are you, girl?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything Mrs. Davison needed to know about the dynamics of that house. The girl got up quickly, wiped her dirty hands on her t-shirt and ran inside the house, but not before looking one more time at the teacher with an expression that cried out for help silently. Mrs. Davison remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had witnessed. The burns, the visceral fear, the way the child reacted to the aunt's voice, everything confirmed her worst fears about systematic child abuse. Meanwhile, across the street, the businessman had witnessed the entire interaction through his window. He managed to see the neighbor's backyard partially, and the sight of the marks on the girl's arms made him physically sick. For the first time in 5 years of self-imposed grief, he felt a genuine rage burning in his chest, like volcanic lava. His former employee had trusted him in some way. Even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time, she had worked at his company while raising that girl. And now the child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, protected by his wealth but paralyzed by his own emotional cowardice. At 11 in the morning, Mrs. Davison made a courageous decision that would change everything. She put on her best dress, grabbed a tray of homemade cookies she had prepared as a pretext, and headed back to the Victorian house. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. The aunt answered the door with visible reluctance, clearly annoyed by the neighbor's insistence. "Mrs. Davison, I already told you it's not a good time." "Honey, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," interrupted the teacher firmly, using all the authority that decades of classroom experience had given her. "And I insist on getting to know the little one better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before the aunt could protest, Mrs. Davison had already entered the house, forcing her way through with the determination of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. The interior of the Victorian house was even worse than she had imagined. Dark and smelling of mold mixed with cheap alcohol, old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. Empty bottles were scattered in the corners, and suspicious stains on the floor revealed extreme neglect. "The girl is sleeping," lied the aunt, blocking the path to the back of the house with her thin body. "That's a shame. Maybe another time then," said Mrs. Davison, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left intentionally on the stove, and especially small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to someone with the teacher's experience. Mrs. Davison and the aunt froze, the silence that followed being tense and revealing. "It must be the neighbor's cat," said the aunt quickly, but her voice trembled slightly, giving away the lie. Mrs. Davison smiled and nodded, but had decided that she had already seen enough to confirm her suspicions. "Well, I'll let you rest then, but remember that I'm always right next door if you need anything." "Anything at all?" The teacher's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning that she was paying attention and wouldn't be easily fooled. After Mrs. Davison left, the aunt slammed the door shut with excessive force and went to the kitchen, where she found the girl huddled behind the gas stove, trying to hide like a wounded animal. The child had cried upon hearing the teacher's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known when her mother was still alive. "You were making noise," accused the aunt, her eyes already shining with the familiar rage that preceded the most terrible moments. "No, Auntie, I didn't make noise," protested the girl, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. The aunt grabbed the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly in the blue flame. The girl recognized the terrible ritual and began to tremble uncontrollably. She knew exactly what was coming next, as she had lived this same scene dozens of times. "You want to draw attention, don't you?" hissed the aunt, as the spoon heated up until it was incandescent. "Want the neighbors to come here and ask questions? You think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, the businessman had positioned his cell phone on the window and was recording again with trembling hands. This time, he managed to capture not only the desperate sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything forever. The businessman could no longer be just a silent observer. His former employee had been a good person, a dedicated woman who always spoke of her daughter with genuine love. That child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. As the girl suffered another episode of systematic torture, he made a call that he hadn't made in months. He called his personal lawyer and old college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as the screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life." The lawyer arrived at the apartment the next morning with a grave expression. The two men had been colleagues at university almost 3 decades ago, and Robert knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. That's why the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said Robert, sitting in the spacious living room. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." The businessman served coffee and positioned himself near the window. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine. She is being mistreated by the aunt who takes care of her." "Mistreated how?" asked Robert, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, extreme neglect." The businessman paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings. Evidence of what's happening." Robert watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something in the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. We can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all those recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. That child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the two men planned the intervention, the retired teacher was in a similar meeting at the small office of Child Protective Services. She knew the caseworker, Anna Beatriz, well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. "Anna, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," said the teacher, entering the office without ceremony. "A child in danger. My neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." Anna straightened up in her chair, her expression immediately becoming serious. During her 5 years as a caseworker, she had learned to recognize when a complaint was serious, and Mrs. Davison wasn't the type of person to make frivolous accusations. "Tell me everything," said Anna, picking up a complaint form. While the teacher reported her observations across town, Robert was in a similar meeting at the district attorney's office. The prosecutor listened attentively as Robert presented the evidence collected by the businessman. "This is compelling evidence," said the prosecutor, examining the videos. "I'm going to order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will that take?" asked Robert, worried. "With this evidence, we can act today," replied the prosecutor. "I'm going to contact Child Protective Services now." That's how, by an extraordinary coincidence, 2 simultaneous complaints arrived at Child Protective Services on the same morning. Anna was finishing writing down the teacher's account when her phone rang. "Anna, this is the prosecutor. I need you to make an urgent intervention in a house on Main Street. We have evidence of severe child abuse." Anna paused, her pen hovering over the paper. "Is it by any chance the yellow Victorian house?" "Exactly. How did you know?" "I just received a complaint about the same house," replied Anna, looking at the teacher with surprise. 2 independent sources. That confirms the seriousness of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. Anna, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to the Victorian house. Mrs. Davison had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. The businessman watched everything from his window, his heart beating fast in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Robert was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change the girl's life forever. "You did the right thing," said Robert, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I hope it's not too late," replied the businessman, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the Victorian house. At the house, the aunt had gone out to buy alcohol at the local bar, leaving the girl locked in the stuffy room. The child continued singing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Anna knocked on the door of the Victorian house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside surpassed even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and clear signs of neglect in every room. It was Mrs. Davison who first heard the faint voice coming from the room in the back. "Someone's here," she said, guiding the team through the dark hallway. When they opened the door to the room and found the girl huddled in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their heart that they would never forget. The child looked up with big, scared eyes, not understanding who these people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, sweetie," said Anna, crouching down to be at the child's level. "My name is Anna. We've come to help you." The girl looked at Mrs. Davison, recognizing the kind lady who had talked to her in the backyard. A flicker of hope shone in her eyes, but was quickly replaced by the familiar fear. "Auntie will be mad," she whispered. "You don't need to worry about that now," said Mrs. Davison, reaching out her hand to the girl. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" And so, after months of silent suffering, the girl was finally removed from the house where she had known only pain and fear. But the real twist was yet to come. During the legal process that followed, it was discovered that the aunt had kept hidden important documents left by the girl's parents. Among them was a letter that revealed that the child's mother had worked not only for the businessman, but had been assigned by him to secretly manage a family charity fund, a fund created by the businessman's father years earlier. The girl's mother had not simply disappeared. She had discovered that her sister was embezzling money from the fund intended for needy children and had tried to confront her. The stress of this discovery, combined with the pressure of protecting her daughter, had aggravated a medical condition that she was hiding, leading to her sudden death. The businessman was devastated to discover that his employee had protected his family and their values to the end, dying while trying to defend vulnerable children, including her own daughter. The final discovery came when it was revealed that the embezzled money was being used by the aunt to finance her addiction, but a significant portion was still hidden in bank accounts. This wealth, added to the resources of the original fund, would be more than enough to guarantee the girl's future. The businessman made the decision that would change both of their lives. He officially adopted the girl, honoring the memory of her mother and fulfilling the legacy of child protection that his own father had begun. The retired teacher became a present maternal figure, helping with the child's transition and education. Months later, the girl, now living in safety for the first time in years, still drew birds. But now they flew in blue skies, no longer in dark cages. She had learned to smile again, to trust adults, and to sing her mother's song without tears. The businessman discovered that his true wealth was not in his stocks or investments, but in the ability to protect and love. The child brought purpose back to his life, while he provided her with the safe and loving home she had always deserved. The aunt was prosecuted and convicted, but more important than legal justice was the emotional justice. An innocent child finally found peace, love, and hope in a world that had almost broken her spirit, but hadn't managed to destroy her ability to dream of freedom. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story, please comment, giving it a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.